Previously in Hedge Knights, the adventuring trio set up a basic camp, which provided a small comfort while exploring so far away from home. They carefully breached into the entrance of the ruins, room by room, leaving a clear path towards retreat if they were overwhelmed or outnumbered. Back in the castle, the Devil Strand was finally harvested, even if the Crimson Caps were immature, to make way for a proper bison pasture. The ruin explorers finally reached the first room with promise of treasure or tomes, a shelf laden with books to be looted once the ruins were cleared of monsters. Episode 42: Delving Deeper. Dave suggested a new tactic for breaching the doors. The doors were ancient and worn, and he thought if they fired arrows at the hinges, they'd splinter easily. This would offer some space between the trio and enemies possibly lurking on the other side. His tactic paid off. The door splintered easily and fell from its hinges, revealing a monster lying in wait just beyond the threshold. They all opened fire on the great sword-wielding visitor and felled him just in time. Every door was to be dismantled, so if they were rushed by visitors, they could split up and flee towards the entryway, rather than get cornered and caught with no way to retreat. It was time-consuming, but only with caution would they make it out alive. The final step of the bison barn would be to dry some of the hay grass to construct straw matting for added warmth and comfort for their woolly friends. Judea grabbed some of the raw wood and quickly fashioned drying racks under the late autumn sunlight. Dave had a similar plan for the stonework doors. By compromising the wheel carrier and rails, they could retreat to a safe distance and collapse the door with simple arrows. After the last swordsman neared so close to them, even Dave, known to be crazy reckless, was suggesting a more tempered approach. Madsy asked Megahoof why the ruins seemed to be little more than a network of hallways, and Megahoof pondered upon her question for a moment. He told her it was likely a result of a military keep meant to quarter only a few troops, but nonetheless be fairly defensible in case of a siege. The long winding corridors could easily be set up with traps or false doors to thwart invaders. She then asked what would stop enemies from just setting fires in the entryway and smoking out the defenders, and Megahoof said that in the times of the High Kingdoms, that would be considered a crime of war, and whatever benefit the keep would provide would pale in comparison to the censure from the other kingdoms. Even warring kingdoms had rules. But that explanation confused Madsy, who hadn't any concept of the way life once was. They couldn't employ something like that against the visitors either, because it would almost certainly destroy any tomes or books they were looking to find. Their cautious approach paid dividends once again. The ambush from a halberdier easily foiled with well-aimed arrows fired from a safe distance. The next bedroom looked promising, a large and comfortable quarter, likely for the keep's commander, and adjacent to the large bed, a shelf full of books and tomes. Despite the potential treasure, Megahoof remained sharply focused on clearing the ruins room by room. To the west of the commander's quarters, a room packed with some bits and baubles, likely once a treasury that had long been picked over, leaving only behind a pittance. They could hear noises behind the next door and told Madsy to fall back towards the entryway. Megahoof and Dave carefully shot at the compromised door to reveal a visitor on the other side, snacking on bread instead of poised to spring an ambush. They initially fell back and realized it was not in pursuit. They went back to taunt the visitor into chase, and then fled back towards the end of the corridor, where they unleashed a deadly chain of arrows to fell the foul beast. Dave gruffly said, "We keep cutting it pretty close, aren't we?" Megahoof, surprised, rebutted, "They're pretty injured when they close in. It wouldn't be too hard to outrun them, right?" in order to convey to Madsy that she wasn't in mortal peril. Dave took the cue and shook his head in agreement, and then replied, "It seems we've cleared most of the northern section of the ruins. I gather we're about half done," which was met with smiles from the other two. The next breach room was full of ancient crafting benches, having not been used in centuries. Armories and craft rooms like this one were likely where the visitors were scavenging for arms and armor to dress the way Adlet soldiers were geared ages ago. Dave pried open the closet door to the north, while Madsy breached a section of the wall to adjoin the new room to the main hallway. The bookshelf in the craft room might hold secrets of metallurgy, but Megahoof knew there were dangers lurking yet, so he pressed on. Megahoof told the other two to search the corpses for bread. On multiple occasions, they saw the monsters in the ruins eating bread which seemed safe to eat. They weren't sure where the bread came from. Likely it was spoils from a ransacked enclave of adlets who were cultivating grain much like the hedge squires were. But whatever the case may have been, the adlets were in dire need of food and searched the corpses for a solution. The abundance of food was also attracting vermin. Likely their packaged Mackie they brought with them was also being eaten by the critters of the marsh. If they were to have enough food to make the trek back home, they need to build a simple larder to keep their food from spoiling. The trio headed back towards their camp to rest for the remainder of the day, having successfully cleared approximately half of the ancient ruin, room by room, without significant incident, a feat unto itself. Megahoof asked Madsy and Dave if either of them knew of communities outside of their own who ate bread as part of their diet. Neither of them knew of any. The bread wasn't like what the adlets baked. It was denser and a bit more sour, so not likely made of wheat. It also had hints of Mackie, which tasted slightly floral and bitter. Megahoof was fascinated by the prospects that some other adlet enclave found ways to purify soil for cultivated grains, but was also saddened that the most likely scenario was that the enclave was destroyed, overrun by visitors who had ransacked them using this ruin as a base camp. The trio were simply too tired to set up a simple wooden larder to keep their food from being eaten. They agreed it would be the first thing they'd tackle in the morning, and Megahoof and Dave settled into their cozy sleeping rolls while Madsy burned off some night owl energy, tossing a makeshift bison shoe at the target stake. The ambience of the waterlogged swamp was oddly soothing. The tiny, purified fern patches hosted enough wildlife that as they drifted off to sleep, they were serenaded by croaking frogs and cricket chirps. They did everything they could not to be lulled into a false sense of security while sleeping in their little lean-to in the seemingly serene swamp. The castle's smaller bison enclosure, especially designated for the matron of the herd, was now purified and ready for its woolly occupants. The builders wanted to move the bison out of the tiny shed before winter's frost set in, because it would be far easier to till the soil where the shed once stood, preparing it for the next growing season, while the soil wasn't frozen, solid, and blanketed in snow. While it would take some time longer for the hay to dry enough to be used for straw matting for the barns, the bison could take advantage of the open pastures now. Judea was happy to see the pasture project moving along. It was always a dream of the squires to allot grazing lands for their beloved pets. Judea meant to ask Sappho how difficult it would be to sow some extra hay in the spring, meant not to be reaped, but instead left in the fields for grazing. She made a mental note to ask him when she saw him next. Megahoof had slept enough. He chopped down some of the nearest fully grown rat palms for wood to build a small larder for their dwindling food hoard. While he was sincerely considering Dave's suggestion of hunting the toxalopes for meat, toxalope meat was known to be dangerous to consume, giving rise to pollution sickness symptoms if eaten in high enough quantities. Additionally, the meat wouldn't keep for very long on the way home, and they certainly didn't have the time to cure it, so protecting their Mackie and bread seemed to be a better option. He also kept an eye out for any visitors, either from within the keep or around the surrounding swamps that might be attracted to the sounds of construction. Given the dilapidated conditions of the ruins, he assumed the visitors never built anything themselves, except for, of course, the siege equipment they attempted to erect around the castle walls. The sounds of hammers and saws were loud and distinct, and he worried about their physical safety while trying to manage their food needs. The three bison were settling into their new pen and seemed much happier, able to roam about the lichen and ambrosia spotted field. Sapple thought it was a great idea to plant hay grass in the spring. It was easy to sow and needed no maintenance, so everyone in the keep could help plant it, saving him and Lazarus the added labor. Sappo also hoped it would become the main staple of the bison's diet, allowing him and Lazarus to phase out the fungal farm. The simple larder was finished and kept their food away from nibbling vermin. The trio steeled themselves for another day of high adrenaline ruins exploration and headed back into the bastion. Klein noticed one of the three bison beds had been forgotten. Having dumped his armload of fungus upon the trough shelves, he went back to fetch the dung-covered bed. Megahoof and Madsy stood vigilant, waiting upon Dave's signals as he pried open several more doors. He poked his head back into the room and flashed a quick all-clear hand signal. Once he was standing beside them, he said he reached another door, but they should seek an alternative route so as to not risk their escape path getting cut off. Megahoof asked what he saw in the room up ahead. Dave said it looked like some sort of kitchen or scullery that might even have food for the journey back. The next door had been sufficiently compromised. The trio took a few long strides back and let loose a volley of arrows, crumbling what remained of the door to the ground, only to reveal an empty room with possible brewing implements. Madsy started chuckling, and Dave asked her what was so funny. She pointed to all of the toxalopes that had wandered in behind them and said, "Imagine if one of them just died right now. How terrible would it be for us?" Dave replied, "For you and Megahoof, you two would be fine decked out in all that gear. Me? Oh, I'd be sprinting and vomiting away. Those things are truly putrid when they die. Oh, and also, that's not so funny." Megahoof chimed in. "Please, could you two focus? Each and every one of these doors could harbor monsters." Just as he said that, Madsy straightened up and stopped chuckling. They had breached into a room used as both a barracks and storage, and then again into a small closet covered in fungal growth from centuries of decay. Megahoof speculated that they had covered about half of the footprint of the small mountain already. He couldn't wait to clear every room, to then rifle through the shelves for lost knowledge. As they chipped away at the slab door, Dave recalled seeing a usable slab door likely leading to the same room, and told them he'd be right back. Dave leaned his head back into the room and told the other two it was fine to break that door all the way down. There was no need to shoot at it, and then join him in the adjacent room when they were done. He pointed to two sections of the wall and asked Madsy to dismantle them so they could flee more easily if they had to. While she worked, Megahoof and Dave stood with their weapons trained on the door ahead, ready to loose arrows. He told Megahoof he was headed to prop open the door that led to the room with the bookshelf. Megahoof crouched to steady his aim. Dave could see that Madsy had rejoined Megahoof, so he took the initiative to open the last unsearched door, only to reveal a giant pile of debris, perhaps intentionally stacked to hinder progress. He waved for their help. Madsy said it would be easier to breach the wall held only together by crumbling mortar. The other two stood with arrows drawn. An old smithy with stoked forge illuminated the room and offered warmth from the dark and dank ruin. Undoubtedly, there were monsters ahead. The only access to this area was blocked by the debris pile, and the forge had recently been fueled. The trio cleared the debris, wondering if there was a door beyond it, but there was not. Dave headed to the next door to pry it open, while the other two stood back and enjoyed the warm glow of the forge. Dave said it was yet another hallway of closed doors to the east and pointed to the slab door to work on it next. All three were famished from hard work, and Megahoof suggested they stop for a quick bite to eat. The smithy was the nicest room to rest in that they had found so far. Dave waved for the other two to fall back and use arrows to finish breaking down the door. The door led to a forking corridor, dimly lit by the glow of the forge. It looked to house some sort of small shrine, but in the dark gloom it almost appeared to be a visitor lying in wait to ambush. Dave waved for them to join him in the eastern hallway. He pointed at the door at the end of the corridor that was already so badly splintered they could probably have peered through it. He was the first to release an arrow. The room looked like one that Megahoof had read about. A messenger pigeon post, where scribes would write coded messages and affix it to pigeons who would fly back to the command post. The three realized in order to have the range to shoot at the next door, they'd need to break down yet another wall. While they worked, they could hear the sound of a visitor retching in an adjacent room, clearly stricken ill by tainted food. They darted glances at each other of concern, as they had eaten the same bread the visitors had with them. With a clear shot to the door, the three lined up, aiming for the hinges, only to be met with yet another target for their arrows. As soon as the wooden block door had spalled, an axe-wielding visitor sprung forth, rushing towards the adlets. Unflinching, they drew back their bowstrings and cut him down to shreds, just like the door beyond him. The trio were growing more tired, and Megahoof could tell. He promised they could all take a break once the next set of corridors were explored. As reckless as it may have been to continue exploring while fatigued, Megahoof knew that they would have to depart for the Bison Grove soon, or their food supplies would dwindle and they'd be forced to make much of the journey back home in wintry conditions. Dave understood Megahoof's motivations and knew why he pushed them despite their ragged condition. He too was concerned about their journey home and the food that they had left. The next room revealed a very curious find, a shelf full of raw maki. Megahoof had thought he had detected the floral savor of maki in the bread, but this now all but confirmed his theory. An enclave of maki and grain-growing adlets were ransacked by these monsters, and he was plenty happy to seek vengeance upon their behalf. The maki would be a boon to their food for the trip home as well. Dave leapt backwards when he finally breached the next door and rushed back towards Megahoof and Madzi, signaling with his hands he was going to hug the northern wall. They focused their eyes on the doorway, and their aim was so true that Megahoof had landed a shot squarely on the visitor's head, stunning him for precious time for Dave to retreat. Dave said he needed a break. His nerves were shot, and so too were Madzi and Megahoof's. He said that the last room was just another barracks with a room at the end of it. They'd figure out if it led anywhere tomorrow. The three tried to wind down for the night, but their limbs were still buzzing with tension and their minds racing with frenetic frenzy of combat. The 11 high Adlet kingdoms enjoyed prolonged periods of peace, probably because Adlets weren't warring in nature. Monster slaying and ruined bastions didn't come all that naturally. The larger of the two pastures was slowly but surely getting cleansed of its remaining polluted topsoil. There wasn't much other work to be done around the castle, and ever since the trio had departed, no raiders had even attempted to attack, except for the giant white bears who never got inside. The old bison shack had been dismantled just in time to get tilled before the soil started to freeze. Lazarus could already envision beautiful fields of grain, fruits, and vegetables for next year's harvest. As Megahoof drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of the potential wealth of knowledge amongst the ruins' shelves. This trip was undoubtedly the most daring thing that the Adlets had attempted, since originally leaving Hillinor Island, even topping the trek out to Pennacook, as this rune was a known visitor stronghold. He then realized the other atlets back home would want a full accounting of all that happened, so he started journaling their encounters so far under the dim moonlight. The thunder woke Madzi, and she noticed Megahoof scrawling notes, and asked if he could teach her to do science someday like he did. He said of course, and in fact this entire trip had been in the name of science, so she was already a scientist just like him. She smiled and went back to sleep. The thunderous lightning brought about a swift wind which rustled the fern grass, masking footsteps and clanking armor. Dave told Megahoof he'd take first watch, and that he had already set up tripwire alarms around their camp with twine he found in the ruins, so he could sleep a little bit more deeply. Back in the castle, Sapo examined Tangier and told her that she was just a day or two from delivery. Soon their little clan would grow once more. Thank you for watching episode 42 of Hedge Knights, Delving Deeper. If you would like to support me as a content creator, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this content with your friends. If you would like to support me directly, please consider becoming one of my Patreon patrons at patreon.com/Rhadamant, or a Twitch subscriber at Rhadamant5186 on Twitch. Thank you so very much for watching, and a special thank you to my Patreon patrons, Twitch subscribers, and viewers like you that support the channel and made it all the way to the credits. Thank you so very much. Hope to catch you next episode.